Andy joins us for another episode of the Shea Anything Podcast, talking about two pitchers, and deGrom, who continues to be dominant, Syndergaard, who has a setback. What might that mean for his career and his Mets tenure? We'll talk Villar and what he's meant to this team, some Lindor, some Pete, some Dom as well. It's all coming up on this episode of the Shea Anything Podcast. It starts right now. Hey everybody, Doug Williams and Andy Martino here with this episode of the Shea Anything Podcast. A reminder that it's brought to you by Verizon, 5G built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. Also a reminder, if you're listening to this episode and you just downloaded it to listen to it, please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, wherever. We appreciate it. So Andy had a nice holiday weekend in which he was busy writing and watching, but that benefits us. It benefits you, the listener, because I was watching last night too. Wasn't a whole lot of Mets baseball on this holiday weekend, but finally the Mets left the East Coast and went to Arizona, where they have a retractable roof where they can play in any type of weather. And Jacob deGrom got to pitch. And we'll start with the 3-batter rule. Andy, can't help but be frustrated just as a viewer, not like the generational argument where you're like, starting pitchers don't go long anymore. It's just like his level of good after the, whatever it was, 3 or 4 perfect innings.
Yeah.
I was already, it was like when you're watching a really good TV show and you keep checking to see how much longer you have because you don't want to.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Like, I was just thinking, I know he's going to get pulled even before
8 minutes. They can't end this in 8 minutes.
I know. But I mean, it's a master at his craft situation where it's just a joy to watch.
I thought that he was going to throw a perfect game or a no-hitter. I really did. And I don't say that lightly because we see a lot of dominant beginnings of games by pitchers. But there was a way that he was a little extra unhittable through the first 4 innings last night. I'm looking at that lineup. I know Marte is really good and Escobar is really good, but I'm not seeing, other than, luck, how one of these guys drops a hit in. And then that would happen. There's a single in the 5th inning and another hit that Billy McKinney dropped. So yeah, it didn't turn out that way, but it was that extra where I was like, this might be happening. I was actually thinking, like, will they put me on Geico Sports Night live when this is over? Is it too late? I started to do those kind of machinations in my head. Practically.
Did you put on the SNY polo as you were
not yet, but I would have. I threw it out in a hurry when Kluber was in the 8th inning the other week. Let me tell you, I thought it was going to be one of those, but it wasn't. And I think what you're getting at is probably like you still had a sense of like, how long do we have in this, whether he gives up a hit or not, right?
Yeah, it was just. It's so much more fun. I was sitting with my family and not everybody's obviously as locked in on it as I am, but I'm like, guys, he has not given up a hit yet. Like, focus on how great this is.
Yeah.
And I think that's fun, is to, share that experience with people watching somebody who's that good. And I also thought it was interesting that Steve Gelbs' report in the middle of that outing was that, we all have to get creative to find ways to talk about how great Jacob deGrom is. And he was talking about how many guys he strikes out while also being as economical as he is in terms of pitch counts. And deGrom's pitch count was so manageable that it was like, okay, I wonder if Rojas is going to get, if he has a no-hitter or a perfect game through 6 or 7 and he's at like 80 pitches, are you really going to take out Jacob deGrom, considering the fact that, he will probably do it? It's not a fluke. Like, it's not Chris Heston against the Mets. It's like, this is the best pitcher in the world, and he might finally have his best opportunity. What do you think Rojas would have done in that situation?
That's a tough spot. And it's funny, we're going to have Terry, it's June 1st as we tape this, and we're going to have Terry Collins on BNNY in a couple of hours and talk to him about the Johan thing. And I guarantee you that if Terry could have been granted one prayer in his life, it would have been for Johan to give up a little single on the 3rd inning and then just been able to be taken out. I mean, it's very stressful for a manager in these situations, increasingly so over the years. Now you got deGrom back. You don't want to hurt him. He's still sort of working his way back from something that he was injured with. So, yeah, I don't know. Thank God for Rojas. He didn't have to face that problem. It's tricky. I don't know. I really can't say confidently that he would have been able to leave him in.
Poor
But
Terry.
I don't know.
I mean, yeah, you're right to promote the fact that he's on the show tonight and that it's the anniversary of the Johan no-hitter. Terry doesn't really, managers don't really get credit. No-hitters or perfect games are so pitcher specific that it's not he managed, Terry Collins on his resume, as great as his Mets tenure was, nobody's saying he was the manager for Johan's no-hitter. Instead, It's Johan might have ruined his career with throwing as many pitches as he did. It's tricky. I think you're totally right. I think managers probably don't enjoy that part of it.
Oh, I think Terry said that it was one of the worst nights of his life. And those are awful because you really do worry about the health of these guys and the way that their arms are conditioned now to pitch deep into games. It's rare. Actually, it's funny. Corey Kluber got hurt after his, but his was 100 pitches. So that was the rare one relatively free of manager stress. And then he goes down with a shoulder injury. So maybe that wasn't even free of. That's just a reminder, whether that was related or not, we'll probably never know exactly. But the point being, these are really tricky for managers to think the moment versus the long term. So Rojas dodged a bullet, even though the rest of us were disappointed when that fell in. Disappointed not because you and I are Mets fans, but because it would be that's historical. I think just like Kluber's, it's not just it's the year of the no-hitter. You have dominant stuff. It's cool to watch someone be that good. It would have been cool to see deGrom do it. And I thought he was. Plus, no offense to SNY and you and I and all of our producers, but it would be nice to not have to do every June 1st, the same storyline. If the Mets could get a couple more, we might be able to spread out the talk a little bit about Met no-hitters. We've had the same conversation about Johan, Terry, Mike Baxter for about how long have you been working here? Every June 1st. So let's go, fellas. Get us some more material on the no-hitter stuff.
Although I think even if they get another no-hitter, we'll still talk about it on June 1st unless I think it happening.
Oh my God. You know what I just realized? Holy crap. He would have finished his no-hitter on June 1st, Easter.
True.
Did you know that yet? Did you think of that yet?
No, I did not think of that.
That just popped into my head. It would have been the same day. That would have been amazing.
I was about to say there would need to be another no-hitter on June 1st for us to stop talking about it on June 1st. And it would have happened. Although not really.
Well, my son was born just after midnight on May 23rd. His birthday's May 23rd. So I would have tried to apply the same principle.
Game starts.
I get it. No, it would have been a May 22nd game, but excuse me. Let me redo that.
I don't know where you got 22nd.
You know what happened to my brain there. It would have been a May 31st game. Absolutely, the anniversary of the no-hitter, May 31st, but it would have ended on the Johan anniversary. That would have been cool because it's been one of those weird, quirky things.
Yeah.
Awesome. That would have been awesome. And we would have been able to talk about a different no-hitter. Thank God Mike Baxter and Josh Tolle are super, super guys. And it's fun to have an opportunity to bring them out and talk to them once a year. I'm glad it wasn't some it was great. One of those guys. At least Baxter and Tolle are good talkers. Tolle was phenomenal on the broadcast.
He was great.
Always is. He always is. He's so good. I hope that guy gets into broadcasting someday. True. I've always thought that.
Speaking of weird, quirky things, so deGrom throws a curveball. I didn't notice just watching, and I was skeptical because, sometimes pitches get called wrong. That from, who was it, Zach Wheeler?
Yeah.
Wheeler threw a pitch that didn't exist forever, and then he was like, I don't throw that.
It was a whole storyline about his splitter. And I finally asked him, he's like, yeah, I don't throw a splitter. I was just going along with it. StatCast had it. It was my changeup. Anyway, yes, you're right.
So deGrom threw one curveball. That was exciting. Again, if you haven't heard it already, Jeremy Hefner thinks it's, one of the top pitchers in baseball. It's a weapon that he never uses. Who knows? Could I see 38-year-old deGrom throwing a curveball 20% of the time and waits for the end of his career to kind of break it out? Sure. If he really mixed it into his repertoire, I'd find it more interesting than one.
One is only interesting because it was the only one.
Yeah, it was the only one. It was like someone was like, "Can you throw one today?" Like
I could give. Let's talk about deGrom's curveball for a second. I asked him about it. I asked him about it in the end of spring training. I asked him if he had plans to use the pitch this year. He said, "I work on it between starts." And I think he was annoyed with me. Like, I work on it. It was that kind of answer, which is not hard to get deGrom annoyed. And who knows? I think that's going to be something that we'll see how in-game planning goes. I go back to a start I had against the Cubs. I forgot what year it was, but that's probably the most curveballs I've ever thrown. I find it interesting that he forgot what year it was because it was actually in the NLCS against the Cubs in 2015. I went back and looked, and I triple looked. I was like, no, that has to be the one he's talking about. There's only one game he's ever pitched against the Cubs where he brought out the curveball like a lot. It was to 26% of his pitches in Game 3 of the 2015 NLCS for curveballs. And I think that's an early version of just what he has evolved into, which he's like, I got nothing. Remember how gassed he was in the NLDS? He gets to the NLCS, and he's probably like, well, I can't lift my hand to comb my hair in the morning, but I got to pitch tonight. Probably one of those. So he's throwing curveballs instead of fastballs, wins the game, holsters the pitch for the better part of the next several years. Every once in a while, he had a start where he would throw 10%, 15%, and then he kind of totally abandoned it. And as he told me in that question, and then answered my question in spring this year, he's like, yeah, we'll see. I don't know, kind of a field pitch. Because there was another game where he had said in 2020, he said, I've given up a couple homers on my curveball, and I'm like, why in the world would I throw that? Which is fair because he has 3 other elite pitches. So, yeah, it was an interesting way he dunks. He drops it in on Ketel Marte. In the Diamondbacks game, it was in a sequence with a changeup and a fastball. So it was like, ooh, ooh, ooh. And then he gets the strikeout. So it's just having a little fun, I guess.
I imagine being James McCann and like putting down 1, 2, 3. And like, oh, interesting. Here we go. Like getting kind of excited. I mean, it's got to be a very weird pitch calling thing to be like, this is the moment that this guy's deciding to bring out the secret weapon. Because that's really, I mean, it kind of is what it is. And let's say he brings it out his next start and gives up a home run, we won't see it again for years. It's like,
could be.
Yeah.
I think you make a good point about how when he's 38, who knows? Because he has it. We've seen him evolve. Gary made a good point last night or Monday night on the broadcast saying when he came up, he was a 2-seam guy, totally different pitcher. Now he's Mr. 102 miles an hour. So maybe there's an iteration where he's older, which is more of a junk baller where he can bring that curveball out again and be effective as an older pitcher if he's healthy.
For our second 3-batter rule, let's talk Kevin Pillar. And deGrom was one of those guys who spoke glowingly about how much he's enjoyed being his teammate. And you see him last night, he's wearing his mask over his nose. And Andy, I'm curious to hear your opinion on this because I think that you dig deeper than the so-and-so is a good clubhouse guy stereotypes, right? Because a lot of times those exist where it's like, I won't name names, but the Mets have had them in the past couple of years where it's like, they're known to the fan base as a good clubhouse guy because they give good sound bites, but that's not necessarily what it actually means behind closed doors. But the fact that, what did you think, first of all, about Keith's point last night, that it wasn't just his toughness and, getting back after the 10 days. It was also the fact that like he was out there the next day answering the questions to reporters, talking about the team and kind of putting the story behind him and moving things forward. And that the teammates probably really respected that.
I think that's a great point. I think that's a really good point because I've thought about this a lot and I appreciate you assuming that I might be thinking about this a lot. And I did some research this morning. I think Kevin Pillar hasn't done anything wrong in this instance. He's come back from an injury, a gruesome injury, and he's come back quickly. Kevin Pillar has said and done things in the past that have been very wrong and has had to apologize for them, but there's nothing troubling going on in this instance from him. It does give me some pause. I don't want to make this about me. It is cause for some concern when I think teammates and fans go over the top romanticizing someone for coming back fast from an injury or playing hurt. I mean, if I can give a little background on this, like without boring anyone, this comes out of a whole tradition. I don't think the Pillar thing's the best example of this, but it's more the way that it's been cheered over the top. There's something called muscular Christianity that kind of formed the attitude of American sports in the late 19th century, and particularly football, that emphasized toughness and manhood, and it had tentacle, like a darker side of like homophobia and misogyny and like be tough and play hurt. And a lot of people have gotten hurt from that and been damaged by that mentality. And it extended into recent years with it's finally been turned around in football a little bit, but guys thinking it was tough to play through concussions in football is some kind of admirable trait. And I still think in sports, and you trickle that down to the youth level, when we hear our pro athletes getting lionized for coming back from gruesome injuries fast, like that's a great thing no matter what. I think it could encourage a kid to play hurt when he shouldn't be, or God forbid, play through a concussion or something. So the whole discussion around this guy's a warrior is bothersome and is potentially even dangerous. So the way that Villar has been talked about is not great. But what he did, I can't judge. I mean, he got hit in the face. He felt good enough to play, and he's playing. That's cool. So I just think there's a lot of layers to this, but anytime it's like this guy's a warrior over and over again, and that's celebrated, I think that's worth taking a pause and looking at where that comes from and how that's not always healthy.
And I think to the Mets specifically and Villar specifically, him being back in the clubhouse immediately, being on the dugout steps, looking the way he did, just having played a small amount of sports in my life, you appreciate that because it's seeing somebody go through maybe the scariest possible thing that you can go through on a baseball field and then being there to cheer you on. Like being on a baseball field and hearing a teammate cheer you on, as casual and like simplistic as that seems, is a nice thing. Like I remember my teammates in high school that were like really supportive of me. And at the pro level, I think everybody's kind of in it for themselves deep down because it's how you make a living. But the fact that, Villar spoke about his team the way he did, was there to support his team the way he did after going through what he did, is to me something that I would appreciate if I were his teammate. And I think it's, I think it's not just about how quickly he came back or anything like that. To me, it's just the fact that he was so, honest and transparent about how it felt. And that I personally, if that happened to me, I'm not sure I could ever play again. Like, I don't know.
Well, I think that's a good point, that people feel supported by him, that he showed up, and that's great. I just think that if he decided to stay home because it hurt and be a little depressed about it and lay in bed for like a week and deal with it emotionally, that would have been as admirable and sometimes harder to do for people.
So the next three guys we want to get into for the three batter rule, Lindor, Pete, and Dom, we saw good things out of all three of them last night. Now, one of them's returning from injury. Two of them have just been healthy somehow amidst all these injuries, but not playing well. Dom had that missile to left center. Lindor had a couple very good at-bats. Pete hit the long 440-foot home run. Even though they're not fully healthy, Andy, the fact that they're 6 games over 500, the fact that those three guys are, you realize on a night like last night, still in the lineup, does that give you the reassurance that any Met fan would need, that you've been saying for weeks or months now, that the Mets are indeed a very good team?
Well, look at them, man. They're good even when they're a collection of spare parts. I mean, they're just winning ball games, right? So, yeah, the fact that those guys are still in there and plugging away is great. They'd be a lot better if Smith and Lindor were hitting up to expectations overall, obviously. Imagine how good they would be. But yeah, Alonso seems like really an established, terrific hitter at this point. I know the batting average isn't exactly where you want it, but he's leading the team in home runs. He looks pretty good most of the time. Seems like he's always going to be a guy that gets out of his zone and chases and expands and stuff. When he gets off, it looks bad. But it looks like we know what he is, and it's not a fluke from his rookie year. And he's back, and that's great. So, yeah, but clearly with the Mets, if you throw Cameron Maybin out there and he goes 0 for 50, the team's still going to win. So it doesn't really, they're okay no matter what happens. I think we've learned. And it helps. Look, the rest of the division could not capitalize when the Mets were depleted. And now the Mets regulars are starting to come back, and it'll be even better for them. I mean, at this point, it's just obviously things can turn at any point in any way, but the fact that the Mets got through this and they're comfortably in first place and guys are coming back and they're confident. I mean, things are just looking really good, obviously, for this team. I mean, wouldn't you be shocked if we weren't like broadcasting shows around the division series and NLCS potentially at this point?
I would be shocked. I think the Mets are a playoff team. You're listening to the Shea Anything Podcast. It's brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on only on Verizon. So you wrote late last week about Noah Syndergaard and the scenarios. He's not picking up a baseball for 6 weeks. And yeah, it's fascinating, Andy, because you're looking at late August, best case scenario. September, right. More likely, right. And never pitching this year is also fairly likely. Let's say he doesn't pitch at all. The Mets give him a qualifying offer?
I didn't think so when I wrote that piece you're referring to, because it was like, well, I was thinking the typical contract, like a make good pillow contract for a pitcher over the past couple of years has been 8, 10, 11 million, whether it's Rick Porcello, Corey Kluber, Taijuan Walker, which was 2 years, but in that kind of AAV. So you're thinking the qualifying offer is upwards of 20. You're really going to give Syndergaard, who's less accomplished than Porcello and Kluber, 2 Cy Young winners, you're going to give him double that money for 1 year? I was like, I have a hard time seeing that. But then I was kind of talked into it by some sources that, no, look, the Mets have the resources to overpay for 1 year of Syndergaard. This way you don't have to worry about him becoming a free agent. Have him on a 1 year deal. You figure he's motivated. Not that he isn't usually, but that he's especially motivated. 1 more year. Overpay him for 1 year on the qualifying offer kind of makes sense for both sides. That's what, after writing that piece where I kind of downplayed the qualifying offer, I thought it was more likely initially that the Mets would let him become a free agent, then try to get him on that Kluber type deal, 11 million or something. But then I was kind of talked into after writing that, like, don't sleep on the qualifying offer.
Well, Stroman is an example, right? I mean, Stroman
but
didn't pitch.
Yeah. Right.
He didn't pitch in 2020. He gets the qualifying offer because he was set to be a free agent. Right. And looking back, it's crazy that we were wondering whether he would take it. It was a no-brainer for him to take it, but you get another extra motivated year of a guy. And Syndergaard, would there be concern, Andy, like, I'm trying to remember. So Zach Wheeler missed 2 full years, right?
Yeah.
So if the Mets, I'm trying to remember his first year back, what that was like. And I'm going to look that up now to see if that was worth.
Would be 17, I think.
Would that have been worth a qualifying offer? I'm not saying that they're the same. Every pitcher is different.
Because it's Tommy John, which is coming back, Stroman didn't come back from Tommy John, obviously.
So Wheeler in 2017 went 3-7 with a 5.21 ERA, 17 starts.
No, it took him some time to build that back up. I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
No, I was going to make the same point. It's not just something you miss time with. You're kind of learning how to do it again. I can't imagine you really trust how your arm's going to feel after throwing for a really long time. But Wheeler shut down his season in 2017, mid-July. It's an interesting question. And I don't think many Met fans are excited about the possibility of Syndergaard's Mets pitching career being over, but it might have ended very quickly the other day.
Yeah, I do think it's a case where both sides could benefit from the QO. I mean, however he pitches, again, it's just about Steve Cohen can overpay players. It's an overpay for sure, for considering where he's at, but he's probably not getting a multi-year offer. So Marcus Stroman was out there, his agent was out there looking for multi-year deals from other teams in that day or so when he had to decide over whether to take the Mets qualifying offer and didn't find one. And Stroman didn't have Tommy John. He just opted out a couple months. So you never know how any individual market develops, but if Stroman was looking to find a multi-year deal with another team that wasn't the Mets, and he couldn't find one, will Syndergaard be able to find one? I would think not.
You're so right it's not a fair comparison. It's a couple months. Stroman is freakish about staying in shape. He was ready to pitch anyway, and then he had a calf injury. Like, I don't think the Mets were worried at all about like whether he'd stay healthy after the layoff. It was a unique situation in 2020.
The point is, but he couldn't, even given all that you said, he couldn't find a multi-year deal. That's why he took the Mets offer. His agent was calling teams that day about that, and they said no. So I'm saying that points to Syndergaard coming back on a one-year basis to the Mets.
This is normally the time in the podcast where I get the text from Jeff to skip the last segment and move on. But because it has a creative name that Jeff thought of, I think he wants us to mix it in, or he's willing to go a little long today.
Plus, we're actually not on TV or radio, and therefore I assume can play with our length a little bit more flexibly than, say, Baseball Night in New York. Is that correct?
We can
go a little longer.
They're not going to cut us off.
No.
Okay. So he's calling the segment Up Downs. Right. I'm still kind of figuring out why it's called Up Downs, but one guy's up and one guy's down. I think it's someone whose trajectory is going up and somebody who's maybe going down. So his up is Seth Lugo. Now, Jeff, another genius idea that he's thought of. Again, it's crazy that he's not the one here talking to you folks.
He should be the host
behind the scenes
or the reporter.
He thinks maybe Seth Lugo should be an opener. And that I've speculated about whether Miguel Castro, the Mets maybe view him as an opener type and would stretch him out considering he has 3 pitches. We know Seth Lugo can be a starting pitcher, albeit a less effective one than he is a reliever. Do you think that they would think creatively about his role considering that they don't have a 5th starter and may not for a long time?
Perhaps. Yes. I think that our producer, Jeff, was not crazy with this idea. I mean, what I was told recently is that the Mets want Lugo as a multi-inning pitcher. I think Rojas maybe even said that publicly. Multi-inning obviously could mean early. I mean, it does remind you of how the Yankees used peak Chad Green in 2019 when he was opening all the time, but could give you 2 or 3 innings. Chad Green, who came up as a starter initially. So, you could use Lugo at the beginning of games as easily as you could use him in the 6th and 7th. Sure. Depending on need and rotation health and all that. Yeah.
And one of the things we were talking about before we came on was, you can use him for multiple innings. And I guess an opener is the same if he goes, as long as you're not facing the lineup twice, you're an opener. Like the premise is that like it doesn't matter if you only face 1 through 3 or 1 through 4. If you face the 6 or 7 hitter, you haven't faced them yet. So
I'd be interested in how many openers have gone 3 innings. A number of them go 2, but it'd be interesting.
I'm not really sure why. I mean, like if the premise is that you're only facing the lineup once through, I totally get that premise. I understand that more actually than the guy just pitching a 1, 2, 3 inning in the first and then leaving the game.
Well, yeah, but if they pitch the first 2, I think bringing in the bulk guy to face 7, 8, 9 is appealing. If you have a lesser back end starting pitcher, he gets to skip the top of the lineup once.
Yep. Okay, so the down in this segment is JD Davis. And Andy's very down on himself for having.
I'm not. I'm down on my source.
Andy's very down on his source for telling him that JD Davis was beginning his rehab stint with Syracuse. Was that supposed to be tonight?
There were plans afoot for it to be tonight. I was told it was going to be tonight, and then I was told apologetically that it's actually not.
Okay, so it's not. So Mets fans were hopeful that JD Davis was going to be part of this wave. Sounds like it's going to be a little while longer. And even so, Andy, again, we were talking about this with Keith last week. Villar could hit 200, and he said he's pretty close to it. Mm-hmm. But he's on base every night and he's dirty every night. And we were talking about how it's just always got a messy uniform because he's stolen a base. Maybe he's made some terrible base running mistake, but his intentions were good. He's just like a fascinating watch.
Yeah.
And given the defense that he plays, he almost made that play in the shift last night in foul territory that would have been insane. How do you, when JD comes back, value what Villar has brought?
JD Davis's OPS is over 1,000 this year. VR is 727. I think it's a pretty open and shut case. And I agree with everything you're saying about how fascinating he is to watch, and how he can make things happen on the bases. So he can play second, I think, right? He can play second over Peraza.
Yes.
So there you go. Put them both on the field. And once that can't happen anymore, someone else could get hurt. You could need he'd be a tremendous pinch runner, defensive replacement. He makes things happen on the bases. Sometimes those things that happen are being picked off. It's not always good. I know somebody who knows VR really well. It was like, I won't claim to know VR well personally myself, but someone was like, remember in Philly when he scored from second on what was it, a wild pitch or a pop-up or something?
No, it was first. He scored from first, and Rhys Hoskins fell asleep.
Yes, on a lazy throw. That's right. And Hoskins fell asleep. Okay, so the person I know that knows VR really well and likes him was like, I'm afraid that play working will make him do careless things now because he's feeling himself. It's he lives right on that line, but it's fun. So yeah, he's obviously a good guy to have on the team, a spark plug, and you just hope he doesn't get picked off in Game 7 of the World Series and tie game in the 8th inning. That could happen.
That's very true. It could happen. And you're right about second base. Peraza's been very good too, and sometimes with good teams, it's not even about the numbers. And that's starting to be what we see with the Mets, which is a really good thing. That when guys are coming up, you're not, oh my gosh, he's hitting 230. It's not really about that. And, we keep doubting JD Davis, and you're correct to point out that he's too good a hitter to really have these conversations with. And note to self going forward, and this is a point you just made, from now on, when we talk about these potential issues, we should just say, when somebody else gets hurt, he'll play this position.
Right.
Kind of makes our job a little too easy and maybe a podcast a little too uninteresting, but it's more realistic.
We'll just call the podcast. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens.
Reminder to subscribe, rate, and review to the Shea Anything Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We appreciate you listening as always. It's brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. Andy, thank you. We'll talk to you tonight. Terry Collins on Baseball Night in New York. This is Tuesday, June 1st. Almost, again, the day of the Mets no-hitter / perfect game. Really would have been fascinating. Andy, Jeff, thank you both. We'll talk to you later this week, everybody.